All right, everyone. It is 11 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock Mountain Time here in Provo, Utah. Rob is on the East Coast, so that's why I say 11 Eastern Time. But we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Craig Altum, and I'm a member of the WYSIWYG Resource Library team. Right now I comprise the entire team, but hopefully we'll have others who join me as we've had in the past. I'm not presenting the webinar, but I will address some things that pertain to the resource library for this webinar. Just so you're aware, if you can't attend the whole webinar session today, or if we go too fast, if you miss some things, we will be recording this webinar and publishing it out on the resource library. You'll also be able to find a link to the video in Cool Solutions, and hopefully on YouTube and a few other places. We'll try to put it out on Facebook, on Twitter, places like that, so you can access this webinar. We're excited to have Rob Luhrs, who is a senior technical specialist here with Novell in professional services, talk to us about custom JSPs and how they relate to WYSIWYG, and how you can extend the existing WYSIWYG features using these custom JSPs that he'll show you. So without much further ado, the webinar will last about an hour, but I want to give Rob as much time as I can, so I'm going to pass the controls over to him, make him the presenter, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. All right. So up on the screen now, you should see what our agenda is for this hour. It's a fair amount of data we want to pack in, but I know there's a lot of people who are interested in this, in JSPs and how to extend WYSIWYG, as well as a little bit of what's coming in the future for WYSIWYG. So just running through the agenda fast. The introduction we've already sort of taken care of via Craig. I'm going to talk about how WYSIWYG utilizes JSPs, where in the current version of WYSIWYG, which is WYSIWYG 3.3, as well as the next small version coming out, 3.4, which is relatively imminent, the next month or two, I believe, where you can also use those JSPs. And then where JSPs can be used in WYSIWYG 4. There's a fairly large change coming into how the UI is built in WYSIWYG, and so there's going to be some drastic changes to what you can do with JSPs in WYSIWYG 4. Once we get through that sort of upper level, more admin-y pieces, we'll be covering examples of JSPs in a landing page, examples of JSPs in a form, and then briefly touching on how to use JSPs to extend a workflow. I'll explain more about that when we get there. After that, we'll get to some best practices that everybody should know about. And after that, we'll do a little Q&A if there's any additional questions. For those who've done previous webinars here through the WYSIWYG library group, I run things a little differently in terms of I'm not a PowerPoint guy, so 90% of what you see is going to be sort of hands-on with a virtual machine that's running Linux. It's running WYSIWYG 3.3. It's actually running Kablink, which allows me to run a developer environment. In addition, as I see if questions pop up into the box on the right side over here, then I'll be trying to answer them as we go. And if you ask a question that I'm planning on answering later on in the webinar, I'll probably at least pause to inform you of that so you know that I'm not ignoring you. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start to get started here. So let me pull up my virtual machine here. So for those that don't know, of course, there are instructions on kablink.org on how to set up your own virtual machine or virtual development environment. And so that's basically what I'm using here. But the things that I'm going to show you are the exact same if you're running a Windows machine or a Linux machine. Almost doesn't really matter that much. So the first thing we're going to talk about is basically how WYSIWYG uses JSPs. So when you're inside of WYSIWYG, and here I'll just open up a web browser here where I'm logged into a very simple installation here. JSPs in WYSIWYG 3.3 are what we use to display pretty much everything you see on the screen, everything from the admin console menus to how we present a blog, for example. So everything you see from how we build a new entry form. This is all written using a JSP file. If you added an entry, well, how the view entry looks is all done via JSPs as well. For anybody out there who, and hopefully everybody has tried this at least once, built a custom form, when you actually are adding custom form elements, so when you tell a custom form, oh, I want to add a text box here or a select box, we're actually invoking a JSP on the back end that's writing up the code for you on the back end. And so JSPs are sort of integral to pretty much everything that we do in terms of the visual side of Vibe 3.3. And this has been true since Teaming 2.0, to be honest with you. There's a little bit in Teaming 1.0 that was JSP-based, but starting with Teaming 2.0 and moving its way up into the Vibe world, it's all been JSP-based up to date, up to this point so far. So looking at Vibe 3.3, let me just go into a little bit of, I'm actually going to change the agenda slightly here. So in Vibe 3.3 and 3.4, as I mentioned, custom JSPs, and not only custom JSPs, but the actual product itself is using JSPs for everything. Now, the big difference coming in Vibe 4.0, just to get it sort of out of the way now, and it'll explain the rest of the agenda. In Vibe 4.0, we're changing over majority of the interface to what's called Google Web Toolkit, or GWT, or GWT. This is also the programming interface that's being used for Filer. So going forward, right now, obviously, there's Vibe 3.3, Filer 1.0 just came out. The back end, for those that didn't know, on Filer is actually based on the Vibe architecture. And so all of the work that you've seen in Filer, both with respect to its mobile clients, with respect to its web interface, with respect to those various pieces, is slowly going to be leveraged within Vibe 4.0. So as such, a lot of different pieces. So for example, the admin menus, the way a blog looks, the way a discussion folder looks, the way a file listing looks, all of that code is now going to be run using GWT files instead of JSP files. And the one issue to bring up with GWT, which is why it's well beyond the extension of what we'll be talking about today, is everything that is GWT is compiled code. So it's Java code that is compiled code. With the developer installation, you can, of course, utilize that, but the one big downside which is still being addressed is obviously if you recompile code in some way, you fall out of support. It becomes sort of unsupportable because you're running a different code base. That is not the case with custom JSPs. We've sort of built them into the product as a way that you can do enhancements that we do allow for support. Obviously, we won't necessarily support your custom code, but the use of them doesn't eliminate your support like it would if you recompiled back-end code. So in Vibe 4.0, I can probably hear already people getting sort of scared in the background as to what's going on about that. The couple of parts of JSPs will still exist in Vibe 4.0, and the core places where those will be is all of your forms and views. So if you've built custom entry types that use JSPs, if you use them to do triggers on workflows, those kind of things, all those will still work in Vibe 4.0 and for the time being. Any work on landing pages. So if you've done custom landing pages that have large integrations with other tools, or whether they're just display integrations, all those are actually going to be going forward without a problem at all. The one exception to that is the CSS. When it comes to cascading style sheets, there's now going to be a GWT file that you can change, and that'll be the one sort of exception to the lack of support piece, because it's sort of an overload point that you can utilize. So landing pages, forms, workflows, and the other part where you can actually still use JSPs, at least into 4.0, probably 2 or 3 more versions down the road, is the mobile interface. So for anybody who's accessed Vibe on an iPhone or an iPad, use the Vibe app. The Vibe app is really just a login authentication mechanism, and once there, it brings you into the mobile interface of Vibe. The entire mobile interface of Vibe is written using JSPs and is going to stay JSPs. So if you make changes to that, and I'll show you where all this code lives in a second, you'll be able to have that working through Vibe 4.0 and beyond. Okay, so now that we've got through that, let's get a little bit into the architecture here. So this is the root level of my server. And as most of you know, Vive is frequently installed in opt, and then Novell, and then teaming. And so once you get into your teaming directory, the next piece is to get into where the JSPs are. Now this is a little more difficult to sort of track normally. It doesn't necessarily make sense intuitively, but it's under the Apache Tomcat directory, and then Web Apps, then SSF, and then WebInf, and then finally we get to a folder called JSP. Now the JSP folder contains a number of different folders, and in this area is where all of the JSPs that make up the entire front end of the product are stored. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, we have a folder here called Definition Elements. And just to show you this quickly, hopefully quickly, there we go. In Definition Elements, this is where all the various elements that you can add to a custom form are done. So when you go into the form builder and you click on, I'd like to add a custom text field, or even something simpler like I want to add a div. All the code that generates those elements is actually stored in these JSPs. Now, of course, that means you can tweak them to your heart's content, which is kind of nice. And so they're located in this folder here. Now, of note, the most special folder in here that matters for our purposes today is the custom_JSPs folder. Now, the way Vive works is it has an order of operations when it displays a page to you. So if it's going to display a page to you, it goes into its JSP folder to find the correct JSP to run, and that JSP is run on the server side. So on the server, not in your browser, it's going to open up your JSP, and it's going to run through it and find any variables and find any HTML and basically run all the code that is inside of that JSP page. And at the end of it, it's going to output a stream of HTML, which is then going to come across the stream over to your browser. Now, the nice thing about the way we've architected Vive is the last place that we look for a live JSP is in this custom_JSPs folder. What this means is if there's a regular file, so let me go back into, let's go into our definition elements. So let's say we have div.jsp here. Now, if we can open it up and look at it, it has a bunch of comments, and it basically just says get the element that's being defined and then go ahead and display it. Now, if we wanted to change this, we actually could, but if we changed it where it sits right now, then if you ever upgraded to 3.4, we're actually, it's going to be overwritten. It'll go right back to its original one. Instead, what we allow you to do is to take a copy of this file, and you can copy this file and actually move it into the custom_JSPs folder. And by doing so, the one that's in the custom_JSPs folder will be utilized to overwrite, not overwrite I shouldn't say, but to be the last one called when Vive is running through its calling instances. And what that means is it's going to load in into its memory banks the first one, and then it'll load in yours in the custom JSP folder over the top of it, therefore running your advanced code, which is pretty handy for any of the out-of-the-box JSPs. It allows you to write those customizations. This is also where we allow you to write your custom CSS. So, for example, and this, all the files you see right now in here, so forget the folders except for the samples folder, but SS callout CSS, search results, head, mobile, all these different files here are actually pre-built files that allow you to add features. So, for example, this file can be customized to add more CSS pieces. So anytime we run CSS code, we're going to run this file last to overwrite any of our definitions. And the real key to this, as you might have seen in that comment there, is anything in the custom JSPs folder is left alone on upgrade. So when you upgrade to 3.4, we don't touch any of these files. They're not overwritten. Whatever you have in here remains in here. So it provides a nice mechanism to be able to do that. So let's dig a step deeper and start looking at some of these JSPs and what sort of makes up the code base for this. So the first example I want to do, I'm going to go a little, again, out of order for my agenda here. I'm going to start off by talking about a form, and then we're going to go into a landing page example after that. So the standard form example that we actually have in our samples folder as part of our installation. So this would actually be true on your own personal installation. So if you go into your Vibe system and you go to this actual directory, your custom JSPs directory, you're going to see a folder called samples. When you go into the samples folder, you'll see another folder called W4. For those of you not located in the United States, W4 is a tax form that's pretty standard for most businesses and that everybody fills out when they become an employee in the United States. And so this W4 set of JSPs gives you an example of a JSP file. Now before I look at the actual file itself, I'm going to show you what it looks like implemented. So if we go in, I set up a W4 example file here, folder. And so when I click on New W4, this is the form that's displayed. Now, the main reason that a JSP was used here is for formatting. As most people, I'm sure, have discovered, when trying to build a custom form, the tools that we give you are great for functionality purposes. They're not the world's greatest tools in terms of making it visually look exactly the way you want. As such, we use JSPs to give you that full control. And so in this case, we wanted this to look very much like a stock W4 form. So we have a form W4, we have different pieces of information, we have specific formatting running on it, all those kind of things. And so as such, this is how we did it. Now in addition to that, we have custom OK and cancel buttons that have, as you can tell, a little different graphic when you mouse over them. So those are also a little different. So this page was built using a JSP. So let's go take a look at this exact file that's building this form. So the file that builds the form here is called the w4_form.jsp. Now I'm just going to open it up in a very simple text editor. Obviously, you can open it in whatever tool you have. I could also open that in Eclipse if you have a developer environment. But just to keep it simple, I'm going to open up in a text folder. So this is sort of the anatomy of a JSP page that you'd write yourself as well. Up at the top is a large comment section. And so up here in this comment section, it's basically giving you the copyright information, the licensing information, all those kind of pieces. Now, if you were writing your own JSP, you would, of course, use this section to describe exactly what it does, what values you're expecting to come in, what you're expecting it to output, just pieces of information so that if somebody besides yourself later were to go in, they'd have a clue as to what it was you were trying to do. Now, moving below that upper comment section, the next piece we have here is an include operation. So this line here is actually a line that you will see in every JSP throughout the entire product, when it comes to forms at least. And what that is it's saying, okay, I want to include the init.jsp file. Now, what this does is it's initializing a bunch of variables. It's initializing what's called beans. And so, again, beyond the sort of scope of this webinar, the entire Vibe product is written using Java, and Java stores different pieces of data in what's called a Java bean. Now, each of those beans has various values that you can then access. And so the init.jsp is helping initialize all those different beans for you so that they're ready to be used within the form, within your JSP. So for anybody who's programmed HTML, the top part of this should look pretty normal. All you're seeing is, okay, we're opening up a table, and this is doing all of our display pieces, so we have our little OMB number, all these different pieces. And then we start to get into where we're actually doing our form. So the first thing I'll note here is we have a TD or a table cell here that says, okay, first name and middle initial. Underneath that we have last name, and then over we have your social security number as the first three fields in that first row. Just to reference back here, we're talking about this section right here. So we're displaying each of those captions for those form pieces. Now, the next section is where we actually get into some actual JSP. Now, looking at this section here, and we'll go one by one here. So we have first name. And so with first name, we basically are saying, okay, we're creating our own input box. So we're saying an input type is text. Its name is first name. It has an ID of first name. We have a size for how big that text box is going to be. Now, the real key here is this value statement. So in value here, what we're telling the system is there's a bean here called SS definition entry, And in there is a section called Custom Attributes. And we're saying, okay, we want to grab whatever attribute is stored in first name. Notice that syntax here, capitalization matters. So in this case, it's lowercase f, capital N, first name. And then .value is saying, okay, let's grab that value. Now, a neat thing to note, or actually an incredibly important thing to note, what this is doing is this is handling display. This is handling building your little form and allowing you to say, okay, whatever is inside of this, whatever anybody types into this box, we want to have put into the field called first name. Now, what this is not doing, for those of you who've coded before, this is not creating a location in the database to store this data. This is not putting that data into the search index. This is not making this something that the system can actually see again. All this is setting up on the HTML end, really, what's going to be happening here. That'll be very important in a moment. And so the rest of this form is very similar. We can grab the last name the same way, the SSN, Social Security number. There's a number of other fields. There's also a checkbox. You can see a checkbox is slightly different. Instead of we still have dot value. We're grabbing a status, and we're saying it's either checked or unchecked. So pretty simplistic. Again, this is basically HTML. You could even use a WYSIWYG editor, any tool you have to build HTML, copy and paste it into a JSP file, and it would dutifully render that HTML, even if it wasn't necessarily grabbing those fields. You'd have to then go doctor it up with these the different C pieces of code here. So moving beyond this, the next question obviously becomes, all right, I see that, Rob. How do I actually get that value to stay inside of Vibe? So let's go back to our folder here. So in Vibe, as you know, whenever you want to have a new form, you go into our form and definitions piece. And so we're actually going to go in here. I'm going to go to our entry definitions. We're going to go look at our W4 form. So now that we're in here, I'm going to open up the form definition and go into the form. Now, I've obviously doctored this form up a fair bit. I've gotten rid of the title field, the description field, all those other fields. For anybody who's played with it, the attachment field, due to the architecture of Vibe, is one that can never actually be deleted. Instead, as you can see in this little pop-up box, you can hide this form element, and so it's being hidden in this case. So the next element that I added here was a custom JSP element. We're going to go take a quick look at this right now. So this custom JSP element that I added, I gave it a caption, which was W4. I gave it a data name, which is its internal name. And then I basically told the system where to find the JSP. Now, Vibe is smart enough to know that every custom JSP that you're going to be using is automatically in the custom _JSPs folder. So as such, the only way you specify your JSP file is it's assumed it's starting from there. So let's just pull up that directory again. So if I had a W4 form in this folder, I would just put w4form.jsp. It's incredibly simple. But instead, it's inside of my samples folder, and that's why if I scroll this down, you'll see that we have the samples folder, and then it's inside the W4 folder, and then inside of there we have w4_form.jsp. And so that's how we actually make the call out to reference our JSP that we've written here within a subfolder. So now that we have that file in there, that's what's doing all of the display. So you can see here in our little form preview that it's displaying for us everything that came out of that form. So now I want to tell the system to capture various values. So I've already set it up to capture the first name and the last name. So to show you another one, we're going to capture the Social Security number. So the way we do this, I'm going to go back and look at our code, and I'm going to say, okay, do we call internally? This is called the Social Security number SSN, so just the letters SSN. Good to know. So what I can do, and if you haven't discovered this in a form, is you can actually, in addition to adding things at the top level, so I can click Add here to add any of our standard form elements, or I can add layout options. I can add a custom JSP, which is what I did to add this one. I can also click on the custom JSP itself. I can click Add, and I can add any element I want to inside of the JSP. Now the reason you do this, and so here I'm going to select text, is by adding this element inside of here, this is what is telling Vibe, hey, there's going to be a field. It's going to have a data name, and this is the key here, is the data name is matching up to the data name in our JSP. It's going to have a data name of SSN, and so for a caption, which won't display anywhere, I'm just going to call that SSN as well. Width here doesn't really matter. I'm going to put a number here. Again, it's going to ignore this number because all it is all the display work is handled via this JSP. So by doing this, this is telling Vibe, hey, there's going to be a field. It has an internal name of SSN. Set up a spot in our database for it. Make sure you add it to our search index. Make it so that we can search for it. Make sure that it displays, all the rest of that. And I click OK. And so now it adds that text field here. Now, as you've noticed, this did not add an additional box here, underneath here, or anything else like that. These, again, are just the internal working so that Vibe is aware that you're going to be recording that field. Now, notice I have not done this for home address. So just to show you this, sort of the proof in the pudding side of the house. So here's our form. I'm going to go ahead and fill it out. So I'm just going to type in my name, Rob Luhrs, and I'll make up some security number. Now I'm going to go ahead and click OK, submit that entry. So there's my entry. And when I click on it, we can now see our form. We can see it says, oh, there's Rob, there's Luhrs, and there's our social security number. So home address. So I'm going to click on modify here. Then I'm going to put in a home address. I live in Washington, D.C., which I realize should be in the box below it, but for the purposes of argument, I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to hit OK. And what you'll notice immediately is the system isn't displaying this at all. It doesn't know how to show it because its value has not actually been stored in the back end. Now, for practical intents and purposes on a live system, it's sort of gone. In this system, it stays cached, so it might show up again in a moment. But it won't show up on this page. So if I want that to show up, I need to do the same thing I did for Social Security number. So I need to go into the folder, go back into our W4 definition, go back into our custom JSP, need to add a new text field. Now this time again, I can go back to our JSP file itself. I can go take a look. Okay, home address here, and I want to know what home address is called, and it's called address, all lowercase. So that tells me what I need to know there. So the data name here is address. I'll give it a caption. I'll give it size. So I'll add that in. Exit out of my form builder. Now when I go back into modify, I can type in again, Washington, D.C. I hit OK. And now the system has saved that value. So, as you can see, there's sort of a multi-step process. So the real purpose here, in this case of this JSP, is for the ability of handling all the way you want it to look. So for every form, there's also a view. So for those that, I assume everybody sort of knows this, but this part here, when I click on modify, when I add a new entry, this uses the form JSP. Now this is completely different from the view. So I don't have to have it look the same. I can have it look completely different. This is the way the view looks. Now in this case, if we go back into our file here, we have a W4 of our form.jsp. We also have a view JSP. So I'm going to go ahead and open that now. Again, we have a comment section at the top. We then have our include of the init.jsp file. And now we start to display the information. And so here we have all just the formatting, the HTML across the top. And then down here where we're displaying the value, this is the line where it's being displayed, we're basically calling the bean, the definition entry bean. We're saying go into the definition entry, go to custom attributes, get the value of whatever is stored in first name. And it's also doing the same thing for last name, for SSN, as well as for address further down. And so this view page allows us to format the view however we want and use this snippet of code. $sign here is basically indicating get the value of whatever comes out of this and display it into the HTML stream. And so when Vibe processes this file, it is storing it directly into HTML and then spitting that out to your browser for display. Are there any questions so far on this? I don't see any in my chat box, but I don't know if Craig sees any.
Yeah, there are a couple that have come in.
Okay.
The first is,
I wonder why.
and I don't know why you're not seeing them, but the first came in from Robert Johnson. It's a simple question. It just says, I'm still on version Vibe 3.1. Will these still work for this version?
The answer is yes. So anything from Teaming 2.0 on, 99% of this code is going to work just fine. The way the JSPs work is the exact same from Vibe 3.0 up. The way you use that form builder is the exact same. Everything you've just seen me do will work 100% without a problem in your version of Vibe, as well as in versions of Kablink. So if you're running the Kablink 3.0, or I forget the numbering scheme we have for Kablink, but any of the Kablink versions, this will work the exact same. There's no difference between how this is processed. Great.
Another question came in from Christian Gies from Germany. He asked, custom JSP locations, paths in FNV Designer, what about JSPs included in extensions? Are they overloading the central custom JSPs or the other way around? And that might be one that you can answer later or address it now.
Yep, so I'm going to get to extensions when I get to workflow. The only way to use JSPs in a workflow is via an extension, so we'll be getting to that in a little while.
Okay, great. So that's about the only practical questions we've had.
Okay. I feel bad that I don't see them. That's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
But I guess it is what it is.
That's right.
All right. So moving along then. So Craig, feel free to interrupt me at any point if more pop in that you need me to answer.
You bet.
So going back to our W4, the only piece left that I didn't really show yet is the buttons. So I mentioned the buttons here. So same thing. These buttons are W4 underbar form underbar buttons.jsp. Again, very simple. In this case, we have our commenting here. We have, in this case, we did not init anything because we're not actually pulling any beans into this file. So instead, we have our style statement here, so an inline style that's indicating how we want it done. We have a little bit of JavaScript that's saying, okay, I want to basically do a self-submit. Then we say, okay, there's a hidden field, which is grabbing a title. We have an OK button, a cancel button, and we're basically on click calling this my submit piece, which comes out of course, our JavaScript, and that's what's submitting the entry. So very, very simplistic. The way this was, again, added to that form is, again, just as a custom JSP buttons. And this one, you can see, is just grabbing that piece there. There was no need for any additional fields inside of this, so I didn't add any other elements inside of there. We just have the ones, as I mentioned, from the W4. Now, obviously, the implementation of this W4, you'd have to also, right now I've added up the entries for these top four, these radio buttons, the checkbox, this other field, these other three fields down here. None of those have been added yet, so none of those would be stored. And so that's an important thing to note when you're using any of our samples, is you actually do have that additional step in implementing them. All right, stepping away from forms for a moment, we're going to step over into landing pages. For those of you who were at BrainShare this past spring, I'm going to use sort of a similar example to what I did at there, just for the people who haven't seen it. And so this is a landing page. And in this landing page, I added 3 different JSP elements. And I'll describe what they each do, and then we'll go look at some code and see how we utilize them. So up at the top, we have a bar in a pretty unattractive color, but it does have this sort of neat mouse over effect as you move through. And this bar is basically giving you a different menu structure. So many people, when they build their landing pages, are doing so, and they're minimizing all the extraneous information so they can max out their viewable space in their landing page. So if you want to do that, you of course need a way for your users to navigate to the various folders inside of there. And most people don't want to do that with just basic text box links. And so this shows a way that you can do a little custom style, a little mouse over action, and display the different pieces. In addition to that, this menu bar, of course, is live in the sense that if I add another folder to this workspace, it's going to automatically add another one. So we'll just show you that quickly here. So if I were to add a new folder, I'll add a photo album here. Automatically Photos now appears in my listing, and so it allows me to see this whole list here of the different folders that are there. The second element that we'll see here is what we call a blog list element. Now what this does is traditionally if you were to show the contents of a blog on a landing page, it's very simplistically rendered. It's just a block of text. And so a lot of cases you want to have something a little nicer where you have sort of a nice fuzzy gray outline, let's say, and various other parts of that. And so this just allows you to do some custom styling around it. In addition, once you use a custom JSP to display an element, you have a little bit more control over how many words you want to display, how you want the fonts to look, all those kind of things. And so in this case, I've configured it to show 2 entries, and we'll go into this one in a moment. Now this bottom one, now this is actually an extension that I've chosen to utilize just as a standard JSP. And we'll get into the extensions and a difference in a moment. And so in this case, I'll just go in quickly to show you the landing page builder and how those were added. So again, incredibly simplistic. The first one was a nav.jsp. We'll go into our modify. All I did here is I specified its location. So in this case, let's back up into the custom JSPs folder. I added a subfolder called navbar, and inside of navbar is nav.jsp. And so that's how I added it here, just as navbar/nav.jsp, very simplistic. Now in this case, it did not need to be associated with a folder or an entry or anything else, because it's actually pulling all of its elements from the entire workspace. The next one down, though, is blog list. So for blog list, this is different. So again, I created a subfolder called blog list under custom JSPs and have a bloglist.jsp file. Now in this case, I wanted to associate a folder with this custom JSP. So I selected the blog that was in the workspace, and then here is where I also have told it how many entries I want to show. So I can change this. Let's say I wanted to change that to 3. I can do so. Oh, 3. Thank you. I can change that to 3. And that's how I did that one. And the search box, again, very much the same way as the top one. It just has a subfolder called search and then search.jsp. So if I hit OK on this, we now see that we have 3 blog entries instead of 2 that is being live figured out via the JSP. So to go see how those were built, we'll start with this navbar one up at the top. This is a file called nav.jsp. Now in this instance, I didn't bother putting a bunch of comments at the top, but that's only because of the development installation. For any production JSPs, cannot stress enough, make sure you have comments there because, again, it's frequent either A, that other people are going to need to work with your code at some point in the future, or more likely, for most of us, the answer is B, which is 6 months later, someone's going to ask us to tweak something. We're going to come back in and have no idea what it was we were thinking when we wrote this JSP. So at the top, as always, we do our init.jsp. The next thing that happens in this case is we're doing our custom style, our first custom style. The next one here is we're furthering that style. So we have another style statement here. This is, again, just all CSS. So we have our CSS menus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm scrolling through this because telling you how to code CSS isn't really the point of this. So now we get down here at the bottom. Now, down here at the bottom, we actually get into some JSP coding. So here we can see a little bit of the syntax of JSP. Now, as was mentioned on the Cool Solutions page for this, the intent of a 1-hour webinar, of course, is not to show all the syntax of JSP coding. There are tons of books out there that can show you all that. And Vibe doesn't do anything special. There's nothing proprietary about it. The only thing you need to know is which beans are available, but any JSP coding on any product, on any JSP in the world, utilizes Java Beans, utilizes the same syntax. But for the sake of argument, just to walk through it for a second, this is the nice little for each statement. And we're saying, okay, for each binder, now the bean here we have is basically we're saying, okay, for every item in ssbinder.child work areas. So child work areas, what this means is it's basically saying, get me all of the children folders inside of our current binder. So it's very, very simplistic, and it's doing a for each. So it's going to walk through all of the children that are there. So the next thing we have here is we have our list item. We have a link, and a link is basically saying, okay, how do I get my link? The link is going to be the SSF, the binder.id, the URL of it. We're updating our count here, and we're showing the title of the folder. And so this allows us to create our link, which is what you'd click on. That's our SSF URL here. And then we have the title, which is the title of the various binders, which are folders. So again, terminology here. Inside of Vibe, a binder is a folder. And so each folder here, and a folder is a blog or a wiki or a calendar, any of those things are considered binders. And so we're grabbing the title of that binder. And then down here we are closing off our list item, and then we close off our for each statement, and we're done. So the actual quote-unquote coding here is very, very small. It's a single little for each statement. That's the extent of the quote-unquote JSP code in here. Everything else is just grabbing styles, as well as, of course, that upper-level init piece. So very, very simplistic JSP that allows you to write that. Now, the next one we're going to look at is we'll go ahead and look at that blog list one. So again, very similar. Up at the top, we're doing our init.jsp include. And now we're setting a couple of variables here. Basically, we're saying, okay, I want to grab the folder ID, which is this mashup binder ID, and I want to grab the mashup binder itself. And the next thing we do is our style statement, so we can see that. Now, this map binder ID piece here, well, I'll get to this in a second, but so again, we have our for each statement. We say, okay, it's a blog. We want to see how many we grab. And as we go through, we want to display that blog entry. And so we do our link first for the title of the entry. And then we go ahead and display our folder entry. And so we display the folder entry. We give it what style we want to have. We have the title field here. Now we have the description. So again, very simplistic. The key values here, though, is that top one, that folder ID, is telling our JSP which folder is the one we've specified in the designer. And the next element here is giving us our count of how many entries to display. Again, coming in through that, through our JSP, through our landing page designer. And so that's displaying this piece here. Again, we have our links for the titles that I described, and then we have all of our text here as well. Now, if you wanted to, you could further that JSP to doctor up the number of characters in the text or the number of characters here. You could hard code the number of entries you want to show at a time. All those various pieces you can do. Now, the final one we're going to show is our search piece down here. This is kind of neat. So this bottom one here is allowing us, basically it's the exact same as this search box, but allows us to display it on a landing page instead of up here in the corner. So if we go back in, we can go to our search JSP. Before I go through this, Craig, are there any questions out there? I know I've gone through some code this time, which might be a little different.
I'm not seeing any that have come in that I haven't been able to answer privately. So
okay, good. Just checking.
Keeping on.
So our search JSP here, we're including the file again, the init. We're doing our styles, and then we're coming in here and we're saying, okay, again, this is all just HTML thus far. And so then we get down here and we're actually saying, okay, we're going to set up our div, and we're going to create our search button and our search field. And the important part here is where this is being submitted to. And so we can see that our form is being a post, and we're posting it to the SSF new tab search URL. So pretty simplistic. And again, my intent, by the way, I should have mentioned this earlier, and Craig will hopefully get an email out to all the attendees with this. Any of the files that I'm showing you that are not the W4 ones, the W4 ones you can get to yourself, I'm going to try to post onto vibe.novell.com so that you can get to them and play with them and tear them apart a little bit on your own without having to sort of do it all from scratch. So I'm going to try to provide all these files for you.
What we'll probably end up doing is when we release the video, when we publish that in the Cool Solutions article, we'll also point to where those JSPs are located on Vibe Public Access.
Perfect. So this is the search JSP. Again, pretty simplistic. Let's go back to here, and that gives us our search box. So if I want to search for a piece of text, for example, I can just even grab one of those. I can click on search, and it's going to come up with that search result. So very simplistic, and it gives you sort of a brief idea of landing page JSPs. So the next thing I want to talk about is extensions. Now, when we get into extensions, let me show you a couple things first before we get deep into extensions. So one thing I want everybody to be aware of, which I hope everybody is on the documentation page of Vibe, and again, you can get to there by just going to your on your own system by clicking on the help link, and then at the bottom of that page will be the developer documentation. In the developer documentation, we actually talk about how you create JSPs. We actually walk you through the examples. We talk about examples of how it uses tagging, how to use complex data types, overview of the various places you can work with it, those different pieces there. So make sure you know that this exists so that you can utilize it. The other thing I wanted to point you to, the other resource that exists, well, there's two other resources. So one of the big ones, obviously, is the resource library, but that does not contain any JSP code, but it's also good at least for forms and workflows and workspaces and such. Another library, though, which is located on Kablink. Now, for the next, I think, 3 days currently, Kablink is located at kablink.org. However, it is moving very, very shortly. It's going to be located at vibe.novell.com /Kablink, but I'll get you that in a moment.
It's /communities.
/communities. Sorry, we had to make it more difficult to find, of course.
That's right.
But in that Kablink folder, we're going to be moving all these pieces over. There's actually a place in there that talks about extensions, and so it talks about how you use extensions. Now, what you might notice, and the immediate question I would probably get on this is, wait a second, Rob, this says Teaming 2.0 extensions. As I mentioned before, everything I've talked about thus far will work fine from 2.0 all the way up to 3.4. As such, and actually it'll probably work in 4.0 as well. I haven't tested any of that stuff yet on our beta code, but I expect it will. These extensions, while they're coded for Teaming 2.0, work just fine in Vibe 3.3. And so I can go into that library. The library here is a wiki, and it's giving me a listing of which extensions we've already built for you that exist out there. We have a landing page extensions. There's a couple different ones there. A Twitter extension. This is actually one that I'm going to cover in a moment, as well as a search box extension. So we'll just pull out the search box one for the moment. So the search box extension is basically the one I utilized for that search landing page extension. So if I look at the attachments, there's a zip file here. So I'm just going to open up that zip file so I can show you the anatomy of it. So the way an extension works, all it is a way that you can deploy a JSP file into Vibe without needing access to the back-end server. And so this is obviously, of course, pursuant to Christian's question. So basically what happens here is you have an install.xml file, which I'll open up just so we can look at it quickly. It's a very simple XML file. It includes what the title of the extension is, who the author was, the date it was created, if there's a license involved, the email of the author, description, how to use it. It tells it that it's okay. It's going to put a search box here. So very, very simplistic, but required for building an extension. And then it has a folder base. So it has webinf, JSP, and then search.jsp. So arguably this should answer the question of where it's putting the file. It's putting it directly into the JSPs folder. However, because of the because this is telling us where everything is, we're able to automatically get this to work. So let me just show you this in action. So I'm going to go in here first, and I'm going to break my existing one. So I'm changing the subfolder of mine. Now in this particular extension, we go all the way to search.jsp. So I've downloaded, let's see, we've downloaded search.jsp. So I'm going to go back into my Vive system, and I want to deploy that extension. So I'm going to go to the admin console. I'm going to go to extensions. I'm going to click add an extension, and I'm going to attempt to add that extension. Does this have the extension? No, of course not. That would make my life simple. What folder is it? Stick it in. In the temp directory, of course. All right. And we want search.zip. So now I've added that extension in, and so you'll notice that the text, the description file, and the name here, this is actually coming out of that XML. And so I'm going to hit close to that, and close to that, and we'll go back and look at our system. Let me do a refresh here. And go into JSPs. And inside of, that's not the right one. Hang on 1 second. So as we can see, it's working here just fine, and that is because of the fact that it added it to the right folder. For some reason, my screen isn't refreshing properly here. But it's adding it into the, or should be adding it into the custom JSPs folder under the search folder. And the way you know where it's being put to answer the sort of the question is based on that XML file. So if we go back to that XML file, basically it's telling us that it's putting it into search JSP, search.jsp. So we go to where are we going here? JSP. Why is it not showing where it's supposed to? Unless I'm looking in the wrong folder. All right, so give me a minute on that one. We'll, for some reason, that system isn't updating properly, but it should be putting it in the custom JSPs folder. And for some reason, my Linux box isn't refreshing that folder display quickly enough. But that's where that's placing that file for an extension. So going back to the extensions, another extension that uses the workflow callout, which I've mentioned before, is the Twitter extension. So the way the Twitter extension works is it's actually allowing for an entry for you to basically tweet out a link to an entry on the fly. Now the only way extensions works, and you can see here that Christian has already seen this one and has added some comments about the lack of security in this one, so I'm sure he's going to be building a better one and giving it out to everybody later on. Is we have our twitter.zip file. We'll go ahead and open that one up. Now this extension, again, we have our installed XML file. Very, very, very simple here. We have our webinf directory. Now in this case, there's a lot more to it. Because workflow transactions and transitions happen deep inside of the workflow code base, everything that's happening in here actually involves some Java files. So we have an XML file here. In this case, we have inside of source, we have an actual Java file, so there's an actual bit of Java code that's going to be brought in. And so here I'll just pull it up for a quick second. So we're basically extending our workflow call out in order to run a Twitter call. And so in here is the actual call out to the Twitter URL. And so on and so forth. Now, for those who don't want to delve into writing your own Java code, the other option you have in a form, that's form buttons, where's form? So inside of a form, you can actually, if you know the internal name of your workflow states, which you will every time you build one, you can actually, inside of your form, use a CF if statement, and use that CF statement, and basically do a, if the workflow state is X, then do an operation such as call another URL. That's actually the way you would handle writing your own sort of call-outs within a workflow. Now, again, I say within a workflow, but that's actually within the form. So the form would be doing all that processing. And to show you, here we go, to show you the, where did I put it? Folder. Okay. So when you build a workflow process, we'll just do this very, very quickly here. So the way you would do this, well, the way you could use an extension, I should say first, is you'd add an on-entry or on-exit element to a state in a workflow. And then once in there on the on-entry operation, you'd actually say, okay, I want to call a remote application, which is basically an extension. I didn't install it. And you'd install it there, give it its variable names, and that's how you could deploy that Twitter extension inside of a workflow. In addition, I now know that this state name is state1 internally. So in my form, I could actually write, if I wanted, an if statement that basically said, if it's form 1, so you can see an example of that right here is a sample of an if statement. So this is doing a C if test definition entry custom attribute status as value. So I would actually do workflow attributes dot value is state 1. Then I could then decide what I want to do with it, and that way that code will only be processed when the entry is in the proper state. So, to do a lot of this stuff, and I'm about to get pretty deep in this thing very quickly. I realize we have only a few minutes left, but I definitely want to show this at least. One of the keys to knowing, the immediate question I get from both Christian as well as from a number of people at BrainShare as well is, okay, how do I know what's available? How do I know what beans exists? How do I know how this all works? The easiest and most obvious way to do this is actually to set up your own development environment. And when you do so, you end up actually hooking into the source code, the original source code of the product in the JSP world. And so this is Eclipse that I have currently running. And so in here, we can actually get to any of the JSPs we want. So I'm going to pick one normally here. Let's go to JSPs. I'm going to grab a simple one. Let's go to mobile. And inside of mobile, I'm going to go into, let's see if I can pick one. There's the workflow one here, show workspace. I want, well, even view.jsp is fine. So in here, I can show an example of one. And so any of these JSPs, I can actually look in here and say, okay, what am I finding here? I'm seeing different variables here. In this case, the first one here is saying, okay, we're going to grab, this was basically saying I want to show a login box if the user is not logged in and tries to see a view of it. That's probably a bad example. Let's find a better example that actually shows us some real code. So this is an action bar showing us the various values of everything. Here's the file. Hang on one second. The file I want to show you, but my screen is not updating it here. That's what I want. If I go into definition elements, and then it is view entry workflow. So whenever you look at an entry and you see all that workflow box up at the top, where it's displaying the questions, it's displaying all the what state you're currently in, all those kind of pieces, that's actually being displayed via this particular JSP, this view_entry_workflow.jsp. Now, so in here, it's basically initially, let me see if I can expand this guy out so you can see the code better. So in here, we again doing that exact same include that everybody else does, that every custom JSP should do. It's starting off with a test. It's saying, okay, do we have a list of workflow states? And if so, that's how we're going into this file. There's also a CF. The end of that if is at the very bottom of the file. And we're going in here and we're saying, okay, we need to grab the various workflow processes. We're saying, okay, for each in the workflow definition of every workflow states, this gives you an idea of which beans are stored here. So we have the workflow states, we have the title. If you're running parallel processing, we have different threads located in there. We have the last workflow title is the previous state we were in. If you've stored a caption in your workflow state, this is the place where you're grabbing that caption information. One note about syntax that will come up as you're looking at this is NLT. Anywhere you see NLT, it actually stands inside of Vive for natural language translation. So anything that has background text that we've written that has other translations of it. So for example, if you ran this in French, instead of showing transition to the word transition to in English, we would say transition to in French instead. And so NLT, the way this tag works, this is good for those of you that are doing multilingual things, is this is the tag. So SSF, NLT, and then tag equals, in this case, workflow.transition_to is the identifier inside of the translation file that tells it what to look for. So if you set your locale to the U.S., it's going to display in English. If you set it to France, it's going to show it in French. German, German for Germany, obviously. That's that language piece. Going down through here, we can see, okay, this is how I can grab the binder of the parent. This is how I can see what the select state is, what our transition value is, or what state we're transitioning to. So you can start to see in here all the different beans that are available within a workflow. Now, if you're used to using Eclipse, you can obviously do all the searching you want. So you can also grab any one of these pieces and do a search through the rest of the code base to see where it's being stored. And you can actually walk yourself through how the product was even built if you'd like. Because again, it's all, the Kablink side is all open source. So you can actually even see the Java code if you'd like to go delving into that. So I realize I'm already over the time. The last thing that I felt that I must mention is sort of the best practices side of things, and I've tried to make that apparent as we've walked through everything. Basically, the major must-haves here. Number one is always comment your work. Makes your life a ton simpler. The second major one is that when you're deploying a custom JSP, because they all go into the same folder, you're always going to want to use subfolders. If you leave everything out here, so these these 8 files here are the ones that we ship with the product. If I was actually going to use this CSS one on myself, I would actually create a subdirectory called CSS, then have this, and then put those callouts wherever I want. And so using subdirectories is sort of an imperative way when you're writing your own JSP files to ensure that you know what's going on and you don't accidentally reinvent the wheel, and so you can always find those files. Because obviously for a simple W4 example, there are, in this case, 4 different files. So if I had 10 different custom forms that I had written using JSPs, we're talking 40 files in here, which becomes impossible to manage. Instead, if I create a subdirectory for each of my custom forms, my life is much, much simpler with being able to track those. And then I can also create a custom folder for each of my landing page JSPs that I want to utilize as well. It also means that you don't end up with the problem. Let's say I create a custom one called blog list, and I decide I want to use it on my landing page, and then someone else decides, oh, I like that a lot, but I want to tweak it slightly and use it on my landing page. So now they're going to go and use bloglist.jsp. I don't want them touching mine because I'm happy with mine. So using those custom folders allows us to create a custom folder where they can copy that file, manipulate it, and then use theirs in their subfolder, therefore not affecting mine. The final on the use of JSPs, which is one of the reasons why anytime you're writing your own JSP files, you really want to set up your own virtual machine or your own installation somewhere external, is that if I were to, when you put a new JSP into the system picks up on it relatively quickly. If you edit a JSP by hand and then save it, Vibe actually won't see those changes until it's either restarted or it's run through all of its processes and killed them all off and restarted them once. So if you have a very high use system, that might only take an hour. If you have a very low use system, that could take a week. And so in general, you have to restart Vibe for code changes to your JSP to take effect. The reason is, of course, for performance purposes, when you start up Vibe, it loads in all that code into its memory banks, into its caching, so that it can easily process all those files quickly while you're using the system. For those of you that do set up a development environment, you end up setting it up actually so you can stop and start Vibe using just the buttons in there. So it makes it a very fast operation to stop and start if you make edits, but it is something to be aware of when manipulating JSPs. So with that, I've gone almost 10 minutes over. Do we have questions in the list right now, Craig?
No additional questions that have come in. We can, I guess, right now, if you have any questions that you want to write into us, please do that within the next 30 seconds to a minute, and we'll address them. I did see one additional one come in from Christian, but he said that he'll get to you outside of the webinar just to not take away from what this is. So. Yep.
So another note, let me back to the right screen here. As you saw on the opening page, there's my email address. I'm relatively busy, but I'm always happy to try to answer questions. If you reach a point where you can't do something and would like to actually get training, obviously this is a 1-hour webinar, but this isn't a full-fledged how-to. So if you have some advanced things you want to try, please feel free to contact me. Do be aware that it might take me a couple days to get back to you based on my workload. As in my position, I actually handle 98%, actually 100% of the requests that come in for Vibe customizations go through me, so I will see all those requests anyways. So if you have specific requests, you can send them to me. If you have simple questions that I can answer in a minute or two, I usually fire off a quick reply to you. If you ask a question that's a bit more in-depth where, hey, I've built these 5 different JSPs and they're not working perfectly, could I get, a couple hours of your time? At that point, I'll probably say, okay, we need to set up a little contract so we can get paid for my time, because that's what my time is usually spent doing. But I'll be the one to tell you when that point hits, so feel free to ask away. I want to try to be an open resource. In addition, we're going to try, once the Kablink site gets moved over and once we have a location for you to put these files in, hopefully we'll set up a discussion area on vibe.novell.com where we can actually have sort of an open dialogue about these, that I'll be able to help monitor and answer questions there as time permits as well. It'll also allow those of you who built lots of JSPs, such as Christian, and as well as I'm sure others on this call, to answer other people's questions too, and try to set up a bit more of a community around these customizations. Just because there's no reason we shouldn't be helping each other. Did any questions come in, Craig?
I didn't see any others come in, just some thank yous. A question that came in earlier that I responded to privately was, is there a place where these JSPs are located where the general public can access them? Right now, there is the Kablink that will be headed over to vibe.novell.com. We have also discussed adding a section in the resource library where some sample or template custom JSPs are there as well, kind of like we've done with workspace templates, forms and workflows, things like that. So watch for that in the future.
Yeah. So as a note, I'm going to try to push us to have those on vibe.novell.com. The main reason why is the library is a great place to grab those files, but it's a tough place to have a discussion if you have questions around them.
Yeah,
so it's easier to have that in vibe.novell.com so we can have a threaded discussion. So if other people share your question, they'll be able to see those answers.
Right. And maybe we'll just point there from the resource library. It's still in working condition. I've talked to Tracy Smith about it, and we're just not sure exactly how we'll do it, but it most likely will be over on vibe.novell.com where there's an active discussion and a place where people can go and download it onto their own VMs and things like that.
Yep. The other note, of course, is all those W4 JSPs, you have them. So if you've installed Vibe ever in your environment, you can actually go look at those. They're located exactly in this folder, or basically your install directory / Apache Tomcat, Web Apps, SSF, WebInf, JSP. And if you go to JSP, this is where the entire system's JSPs are. So you don't need a development environment to see the JSPs. You can actually just go in your local box, even your production, your dev box, and go look at them. If you don't touch them, obviously you can't break anything. You can go look through any of the JSPs we've used as our code base. And then in the custom JSPs, again, these 8 are there by default, so those will be there for you, as well as everything in the samples folder, which includes a number of samples, as well as the W4 example, are all on your system, wherever it may be. So very, very simple. And for those of you who are playing with the mobile interface, you see those are all located in the mobile folder, so there's some pretty simple structure here to go through. And if you have questions as to where something is located, again, feel free to ask me. Some things are a little funky. Obviously, the definition elements I sort of explained was pretty simple. Common is also where a lot of the major broad scope ones are located. But so there's obviously a number of folders here and subfolders, so a lot of stuff to look at. So there's a fair amount you can get to without just getting those examples that I sent. So in the intermediate time, you can do that. I believe that's it for now. Again, please feel free to drop me an email if you have any questions. In addition, if there's a question that I get that I think everybody's going to need, I'll try to add that to our workspace once we get it set up on vibe.novell.com and try to continue that conversation. Also, as I'm sure Craig would tell you in a minute, is keep your eye out. We're hoping to do another webinar like this that focuses on web services and utilizing web services. And so look for that to come up in the next month or two in the future if you'd like additional sort of information on this level of customizing Vibe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was going to mention that we are grateful to have Rob and his wealth of knowledge, that he's willing to spend some time and share that with us through this webinar series. And like he mentioned, we will be planning on at least holding one other with Rob. He's very generous with his time in that regard. If you have questions that you want to direct to Rob, you've obviously got his email here. You can also email us at vibelibrary@novell.com, and we can make sure to get those forwarded to Rob or whoever in order to get your questions answered. So thank you, Rob, especially for the great information. We have a comment that said, great webinar, useful nuggets of information. Lots of thanks for the information. So thanks, Rob, and thank you, everybody, for attending and making this something that is worthwhile. And we'll sign off.